poker graph I'm about to show you is 100% genuine. It is one of the most absurd things I've ever seen, but it is undoctored, unedited. It is real. Check this out. Look at this graph. Look at it. Isn't it ridiculous? Isn't this just the most absurd thing? I mean, yeah, okay. I've been around poker quite a while. I've seen upswings. But this is something else, man. This is 47k hands. I've been working with this student for about 4 sessions now. I think we started exactly as this graph began to soar. Yeah? Yeah, pretty sure that's when we started working together. It's what Carrot Corner does for you. You want an upswing like this? CarrotCorner.com. Check out the Carrot Poker School. I'm just kidding. We can't promise you those kind of results. I wish we could. But yeah, sometimes this is a combination of good play and good luck. Sometimes it's just good luck. But when upswings get really ridiculous like this, the chances that it's only luck actually start to go down. And no doubt the student is running really, really well, like beyond belief. Like what happened here was the student began to take shots at slightly higher stakes about halfway through this graph or something like that. And then they just paid off. Like the shots ran really well. I'm sure the student had a stop loss, never had to use it, moved up to 100 NL, moved up to 200 NL, and is now flourishing there. I did warn the student. I said, you know, this is not going to last forever. This is an anomaly. It's a freak run of results. You're not going to win at 13 BB per 100 over a bigger sample, probably. But, man, what a start. So today's mission is to investigate whether the student is also playing well. How can we improve his game further? And yeah, it's just a really, really nice guy, really cool guy that I like working with a lot. We have a lot of fun in our sessions. So I offered to make this video and go over a few more of his hands on YouTube with you lot. So let's get into it. Is this just lucky? Or does this player have some real potential? Let's find out. So you may be able to tell by the intro there that I have a cold. I feel like shit, to be honest. I've just been getting sick tons recently. My house is a building site. There's a builder here a lot. I just played a bridge tournament with a bunch of old people in a very big room with lots of people in it. I guess that's why I'm sick. I don't know. But yeah, I'm going to sound a little bit weird and congested in this video. Do you know I read a comment at some point a few weeks ago that said that I sounded like a horrible witch or something like that? Like I had the voice of a witch. And I didn't really understand that because I've got quite a deep voice. Like when I speak, like the table vibrates, you know, that's why you'll see sometimes the webcam wobbling like this. It's because my voice causes like the earthquakes, very small earthquakes in the room because it's that deep. So I didn't really get the witch comment, you know. I think witches have really high pitched voices, and if I was a witch I would just be brewing like a potion to cure myself of this congestion, so I don't really buy it. But anyway, we opened ace 9 of hearts here. The big blind goes for a 3-bet. The student pointed out in our coaching session that big blind 3-bets are, you know, really too linear overall. I would say if you look up the big blind 3-bet range that you're meant to use, supposed to, in theory, it's a bit polarized, right? Because calling tends to do pretty well. My Siri just activated for some reason. She thought I was talking to her. I wasn't. Shut up, Siri. We get 3-bet here. We probably expect this hand to be doing a bit worse on average here. This is 200 NL, by the way. This is a Euro site. It's a version of PokerStars that is not the main one. So read into that what you will about the pool. We get a flop of Jack 10-7 and villain goes for quarter pot. So my first suspicion when I see this is just that this is a lazy, badly constructed, brain dead strategy, and anyone who does it should really improve at poker. So it's not that you can't bet this flop ever. It's just that when people use a tiny sizing, they're generally betting range. And you know, when there's a jack and a 10, it's not a terrible thing to do, actually, because your Broadway combos are picking up EV and stuff. But this is also quite a good board for the hijack range. It's definitely one where if you do bet your range and then face aggression, you're going to really struggle to defend yourself enough across 3 streets. And so my recommendation in spots like this is to follow the Carrot Corner roadmap to bluffing. I'm going to give you guys something extremely valuable right now, which is actually a few of the points I teach my private students about when to bluff, and this is a simplified thought process that they can use endgame. The first condition that you want to think about when you are bluffing is essentially in the real world, how intimidating / discomfort inflicting is your line going to be to the average player of the type that you can see. So if it's a reg, then a reg. If it's a fish, then a fish. If it's unknown, then general pop. But how much intimidation and discomfort is it going to inflict to most of their range? So if you imagine villain has queen jack, king jack, ace 10, king 10, nines, eights, aces, kings, queens, one pair stuff like this galore, ace, queen, ace, king, some gut shot stuff. And you raise the flop here, and then you blast the turn, and then you jam the river. How are those hands feeling by the river? Well, first off, when you raise the flop here, they're meant to shove on you very often. If you don't believe it, look it up, and that's why this texture is not played as a raise very often at all, because it's the kind of texture where villain is highly incentivized to play jam a lot against the raise, especially out of position on such a dynamic board that they want to clean up equity on, right? So because they're meant to play a lot of jam here, you're not meant to play a lot of raise. But if you do raise here as an exploit, and I don't think this will be like a massive punt, probably with the backdoor flush draw, you want to raise less and reopen less at these SPRs. You have an over, you have a backdoor flush draw. If villain's playing a load of jam, I can see why a solver is not going to love raise here. But in the real world, people will get very freaked out because this is clearly a board that's good for the 3-bet caller. And when you do raise here, we didn't, we just called. We don't need to raise to do well because we're upswinging so hard you wouldn't believe it. We're upswinging so hard that we're going to wake up one day and be like, man, what did I do last month? Like, what the fuck happened? And this is going to be like a trashed scene because of all the partying from the upswinging. So yeah, we did call here, and I think that's fine. But I think raising with the intention of inflicting maximum discomfort is really good. Our coaching isn't all about discomfort, by the way, guys. There's other things that go into this as well. Another thing that's kind of important when it comes to raising is believability. Believability is the idea that the villain or villain type to whom you're pitching your line is going to be readily able to be convinced that you have a good amount of value combinations in your range. And in a spot like this, there's no reason to think that that is false, because you could have flatted this 3-bet with jack 10 suited, jacks, 10s, 7s, or 8, 9. And that's quite a lot of value combos for a 3-bet pot. To see what I mean, consider a board like King 6-3 Rainbow, where you might not even have 3s, you wouldn't have kings, you wouldn't have any 2-pair, and you just have 6s sometimes. You'd have like 1.5 value combos due to just having half of the pocket 6s. But here, you could have like 12 or 13 or something like that. So this is definitely a spot where it's not difficult for people to see that you have a lot of value combinations when you take a line like raise, bet, bet, and that's therefore going to be a pretty good line. So that's just two of the points you want to consider, is basically the believability and the breadth of your value range and how convincing it is that you just have a value hand, and also how gross and uncomfortable it will just be with many of the hands in the opponent's range to face that action. If you follow those two things against a human, you will do better by bluffing like that than you will by trying to obsess over blocker properties. So just something to consider. All right, 4 spades turn. Our opponent checks to us, and I think this is going to be mostly, in theory, it's not going to be like a massively slow play, heavy range in theory, because this is a very important spot to just bet again when you have queens or kings or something like that for the most part. And that's because the board is really dynamic, and the opponent's range, in this case us, looking at this from villain's perspective, is filled with pair plus draw, combo draw, just lots of hands that have a ton of redraw equity that you want to value bet against and don't really just want to check against. So I think things like kings and aces and queens are going to be betting at a very high frequency here in GTO. In the real world, I would also expect them to bet at quite a high frequency. I don't think this spot is like totally malconstructed for that reason. I think it's going to be like a kind of normal checking range we face here. And I'm a big fan of betting. I think you can build some bigger bets here too. It's definitely a pattern that when your opponent checks to you in a spot where they're still uncapped and protected and will be check raising some, that you want to go for smaller sizing rather than bigger sizing, especially in a 3-bet pot turn SPR. But I think here you arguably do still have quite a lot of very big hands in your range. You can have queens, you can have jack 10, jacks 10, 7s, 8, 9. You wouldn't have 4s, I don't think, after flop or pre. But yeah, you have plenty of hands that could go bigger here as well that crave quite a big investment ceiling. And something like ace-jack could even go big and then check back certain rivers and stuff as well. So I definitely think a bigger bet here is viable as well. I think against a human, I prefer something a bit more geometric here. I'm definitely committing to the line of bet, turn, jam, river here against the human. That's just what I'm going to do, because I just think that their turn calling range will contain too many combos of ace-king, ace-queen. They'll probably not have too many overpair after they just call this sizing on turn. So I think if we are betting this sizing, or even a bit bigger, I'm definitely just inclined to triple off in this spot. And I would think that Again, it's just a very believable spot where you have like quite a lot of good hands in your range, where your opponent will have quite a lot of natural hands that call turn fold river, like ace 10, ace king, ace queen, jack X. You're going to have to call the river with a lot of one pair hands here to meet any kind of reasonable defense frequency, especially if you call all of your ace king, ace queen on turn, which you definitely shouldn't in theory. I don't think ace queen is anything close to a pure call here. So yeah, we go for the river sizing like this. I recommended that we just jam this spot in the coaching session, and I think this is actually quite an elastic situation. There are some hands here that are totally inelastic to sizing, like ace queen or ace king or something, that's probably just going to fold to like a smaller bet as well. And if you think about villain actually getting here with an overpair or ace jack or king jack or a 10, I think you're going to get looked up for this sizing pretty often. If you think about your range here, there are some hands you might want to take this line with, but you're not repping that many value combos for this size precisely if you're jamming your bigger hands here. So if you're shoving here with something like queens or jack 10 or jacks or 10s or 7s, going this sizing is only really repping like ace jack or something like that. There's not a ton of value combos that want to go this big but not jam. And so I'd just be a bit conscious of that here if I was against a good player. And I probably just consider that this is quite an elastic spot where jam does really well. I think if someone has like an overpair here or like top pair, there'll be some frequency that they fold to jam, even though they're probably never meant to do that. So yeah, I think this is a little bit small. We get looked up by queens, which is a really weird turn check. This hand isn't really meant to check the turn. It's like more of a pure bet. And if it does check the turn, I'm pretty sure it's just meant to shove probably or raise. Yeah, this is a little bit weird. But yeah, okay, so we get stacked here. Well, nearly get stacked here. But yeah, who cares about the result? I think the main point here is about the bluffing opportunity and the myriad of different ways you can generate fold equity in spots like this against villains at these stakes really effectively. In this hand, villain was described as a good reg and someone that hero had a note on. And the note that hero had here was something to the effect of, has bluffed in weird spots, triple barreled a random hand that didn't look like it should be a bluff in some spots, something to that effect. So villain raises here in the small blind, 3 bets to 1150, or 11.5 BBs. We call with ace 10 suited. The flop is ace queen 10. We face a small c bet and we call, which seems normal. This is probably a board where you just want 0 raises. The opponent's range is just going to be incredibly strong. It's quite a static board where you're just not going to need to build a raising range for any denial or anything like that for the most part. And I think just playing call only is totally fine here. The turn is the 8 of spades. Villain goes for a large bet, we call again, and villain jams on the 8 of hearts river. I mean, you may be looking at this just thinking, well, you should call because you have ace 10, you have a really big hand, you know, you have 2 pair, you can't fold 2 pair to half pot to a third barrel in a 3 bet pot, you can't do that, you can't fold 2 pair for this price. And if you do that, you're falling into the trap of caring about absolute hand strength. Your absolute hand strength here doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter here, I don't think, whether you have 2 pair or whether you have 1 pair. It matters a bit based on your blocker effects and stuff like that, of course. But I don't think there are very many combos at all here that are doing this for value that we actually beat. You could maybe make the argument that we have a value chopper, that villain can have the one combo of ace queen of clubs, sorry, of ace 10 of clubs. And you could also make the argument that villain has queen 10 of diamonds, queen 10 of hearts. That's impossible. It's just queen 10 of diamonds because we have the 10 of spades. You could make the argument that we are winning against that and that that's a value bet. But the thing is that there's very few value combos that we chop or win with. The majority of villain's value range here is king jack, pocket 10s, pocket queens, ace queen, pocket aces, that sort of thing. There's some bizarre 8-7 bluff that's now backdoored into trips, that kind of thing. So given that we don't actually beat much or any of the value range at all, we should at least have folding on our radar here against certain opponent types. And I would put it to you that there are many player types that you guys are playing against day in, day out at micro stakes and low stakes who are basically underbluffing criminally here. Because when you trace this action and you think about how difficult it actually is to bluff in this spot, it's incredibly taxing. Because the bluffs in GTO here are going to be things like pocket 7s. They're going to be things like jack 10, king 10, king queen. These are the bluffs. You don't get here with naked jack X, king X. People are too vague with their hand reading sometimes, and they're putting their opponent on bluffs without thinking about what those natural combinations would need to be. When we talk about bluff catching at Carrot Corner, it's all about how many combinations of potential bluffs arrive in the landing range. That is the term I give to the range that gets to a node. Someone said Also, in the same thread I was reading where someone said I sounded like a witch, someone else said that they wished I wouldn't invent concepts for commonly known terms. But landing range is a great concept because it differentiates a range that arrives on a street with a range that takes an action, and that can be incredibly useful when you're hand reading, because the landing range, understanding that on its own is really important. I don't know what the common term for that is. What is the term for a range that arrives on a street, if not landing range? I think that's a great term. You can let me know what you think about that in the comments. But, you know, these people who say I sound like a witch that invents unnecessary comments, yeah, they can fuck off as far as I'm concerned, because I don't sound like a witch. Okay. Anyway, we face this, and I think I'd call with the read that we have here. I don't think we should fold. I think this is an opponent that probably is finding way more bluffs than the average population, given the read that we had, that they're an aggressive regular playing 200 NL. They're capable of bluffing in some spot we didn't expect previously. They found a bluff with a hand we didn't think was normal to bluff with. Yeah, this is the kind of person that might have jacks here. This is the kind of person that might have jack 10 here, that might have sevens here. So I think calling this hand is okay, especially if we're in value chopper territory instead of just pure bluff catcher territory. But we should definitely note that this is probably a fold against like a tight reg at microstakes. I don't like the fold here. I get where Hero's coming from. I think it's reasonable against some opponents, but not this one, given the read. But if you play this hand at 25 NL against an unknown, I would be willing to wager that ace 10 is probably a losing call against a tight reg at 25 NL here in this spot, and you should probably fold. And the way to unlock that is just to get the absolute hand strength out of your head. Like, begin to realize that your hand has properties that are relevant to bluff catching, but they're only so relevant when your opponent's under bluffing, right? So you can say that, yeah, I have this blocker, I have that blocker, and you can start to formulate arguments for whether you should call or fold certain combos. But at the end of the day, the thing that's going to be the broad stroke, that's going to be the very big paintbrush here that paints your EV, is how often people are bluffing. And look this up in a solver, look at this spot, try and figure out what you would have to do here as small blind in order to bluff enough, and then ask yourself, who's doing that in my stakes, right? And really, tell me what you think about that in the comments. All right. Pocket fives. This is a really interesting hand. One thing I'm very big on with my students is having the bravery to fold. We call it the fold of a lion. There we go, inventing more terms that already have names. We could just say hero fold, but we have to say fold of the lion because we're difficult that way. But hero folding and the fold of the lion, the reason I like the latter as an expression is that it actually takes way more bravery to fold than it does to call in a spot where you've got high absolute hand strength. Anybody can be like, woe is me, I have a set, I have to call, I can't fold. I can't fold is such an apathetic, lethargic thought process. It really is just such... It's so typical of someone who's hard stuck at poker to say, I can't fold, I was too far up my range, I couldn't fold a hand of X absolute hand strength. And this means nothing. Like, when you get to a good enough point in your poker career, you'll look back at that former version of yourself and realize that that was a scared version of you that was falling back on some very basic pattern recognition of absolute hand strength and wasn't hand reading properly. This hand is a perfect illustration of the fold of a lion, and you won't agree with me probably. Many of you will think that this is not a fold, and you will argue with me in the comments that it's not, but I truly think it is, and here's why. Okay, bit of a spoiler here, but we flopped a set. How are we going to end up folding when we flopped a set, guys? Sorry, but you do have to sometimes. Okay, we've checked the turn. I love this turn check, because villain is polarized by this ace towards hands that are going to value bet, like ace X, and hands that are going to bluff, and is probably unlikely to invest much money with fours or sevens anyway. So just check raise. Check raise is probably the best play here against a human. Giant bet's okay too, but humans don't tend to check back an ace enough on the turn here. If you play against the solver is intentionally making you indifferent between check raising and overbetting, because it's basically checking back its ace X at enough of a frequency, but the average human isn't. And for that reason, you probably just want to let them bet first and go for the check raise. Love this play, love the sizing. You could go even bigger actually, but yeah, this is fine. Villain calls, indicating flush draw, king X of diamonds, ace X, that kind of thing. The river is a king. I don't think king X of diamonds actually bets turn very frequently here. It might if it's making a slight polarization mistake, but generally speaking, this is just going to be ace X or some very nutted hand, but mostly just ace X, right? So going for a big value bet here makes a ton of sense. I think I'd probably just jam this node right away. And the reason I would jam this node instead of going for this weird overbet is just that, like, your value region here is 6s and 5s and king 6 and king 5, and these hands can just go all in. they're strong enough, they have enough equity to go all in. I heard something really silly the other day. I heard someone say something like, you can't just bet your hand strength. And this is so dumb beyond belief, because you can bet your hand strength when you're value betting. The more equity your value hand has, the bigger the sizing you will see GTO use, because it understands that when you use a big sizing, you make more money. Now, this is independent of like how often your opponent's raising you. That's a different thing. But the bigger you go, the more money you make, right? So it is important to go bigger. There's a proof of this, by the way, in the Carrot Poker School. I do understand that, like, obviously the amount of the time you're being called is going to drop as you go bigger. And in some spots, exploitatively, it may drop too much for a big bet to be right. But all things being equal, when you have the nuts and you're mostly being called, not raised with any bet size, you should go as big as possible with some weird blocker considerations aside. So I think I'd go all in here. It's a bit dubious as well, like what you really have. You're saying you have exactly king 6, king 5, 5s or 6s. You're not repping a king here. You know, you don't have a lot of value combos, and all of your semi-bluffs are bricked. So I think you are going to get looked up here by a decent reg. I think this was a reg. A decent reg was the description for this player. You're going to get looked up by this player sometimes. They're just going to not believe you, right? And they're going to call ace, ace-x, ace-4, ace-queen, whatever. So, yeah, I think I'd go all in myself here and just try and maximize from Villain's bluff catcher region, because that's what we normally want to do when we have a really polar range against a more condensed one. As played, though, Villain just jammed the rest in over our overbet. He just jammed the rest of the money in, and he's a good reg, so he knows what we're repping here. He knows that we are repping 5s and 6s and king 6 and king 5. He knows this is our value range, because you don't get to 200 NL as a good reg and not understand that here to this sizing. And yet he's put the rest in. So one of two things is now true. I know we're getting 17% pot odds, guys, but which of these is more likely and by how much? Option A, Villain is crafting some bluffs here and is trying to make you fold your value bets. Is expecting you to fold 5s at some frequency and 6s at some frequency because they have the combos of ace king and aces and quad kings and you don't. Or, secondly, Villain has ace king, aces, quad kings, king 6 or king 5. Now, the king 6 and king 5 combos are a little bit tricky to have here when you have 5s. There are 0 king 5 suited combos left, so I think we can discount that one, but we don't have to discount all of the king 6. There's still 2 combos of that because the 6 and the king are the same suit. There are 3 combos of pocket aces. I know they've checked back flop, so that's a bit weird, but I think being bluffed in this spot is far more weird. Far, far, far more weird. Like 98, I would say, of 100 humans will never bluff this spot in their careers, in their life. Have you ever bluffed against the river overbet in a spot like this? Have you ever jammed the rest in as a bluff against the river overbet in a spot like this? No, you've not. Well, guess what? You're typical of your opponents. They haven't either. So in this situation, when you call, you're just going to run into the nuts almost always. And it doesn't matter how far up you are in your range. And it doesn't matter that you have a full house. And it doesn't matter that this is a hand that you normally don't fold in any pattern or paradigm ever in poker. This is the exception. This fold is the fold of a lion. This is the fold of an absolute lion. Because you will lose if you call here against 98% of opponents. 100% of the time. You will lose 100% of the time against 98% of opponents. Consider that. So if you run into the 2% who are just like losing their shit and bluffing you, okay, this is a bad fold against them because they're probably over bluffing. Because once you open the can of worms and start bluffing here, you're going to be over bluffing. But most people have 0 bluffs, and that's how you should think about it. It's not the case that your opponent has some bluffing range that you need to consider. They usually have 0, and some people are over bluffing, but they're a minority. That's how you should consider it. Right, let's do one more spot. But so far, a few little inaccuracies, but I'm quite impressed with the overall standard of this player's game. I think this fold requires a ton of discipline and bravery and is no easy feat whatsoever, even though it's pretty clear that you have a bluff catcher in a spot that's almost never bluffed. Okay, so here we have king, jack, offsuit. Not jack, king, as it's appeared here. Not jack, king off, but king, jack off. You gotta be careful with that, guys. King, jack off. Got to say the second card first. Otherwise, it's a bit, might get cancelled. So we've called in the big blind. Queen 10-7 comes. We check. They bet small. We raise. It's a very small raise. I mean, okay, fine, whatever. I might raise a bit bigger here. The theory of this spot is like you're 200 deep. and your raising range is sets plus and 2-pair plus, right? For the most part. Maybe there's a weird amount of ace queen that's being thrown in there, and it's being thrown in there for some GTO balance-ish purpose. Okay, it's thin value, but it's also being thrown in there for the purpose of like making sure that, let's say, your opponent can't just always call you with certain blockers or something of this nature. But in reality, like raising ace queen here, it doesn't seem mandatory. It doesn't seem like something you'd need to do. But raising with king jack is fine, and raising with sevens is fine. But given you're building such a polar range, I'd probably just be raising bigger than this in this specific spot. But anyway, whatever. 9 of diamonds comes. We overbet the turn. I think you can go even bigger here if you want to like just exploitatively say I have king jack. Villain has a lot of really big absolute hand strength hands here. They're going to they're going to basically not fold to any sizing. They're going to be inelastic. I think you can go bigger with this hand, just playing hand versus range in a vacuum here. The GTO lens might size down a bit because this is a turn that begins to share the nut advantage once again, because now villain has all the king jack as well, and now your sets are no longer like wanting to put in 200 big blinds. Well, at least like sevens is not wanting to like splurge 200 BBs into the middle. So anyway, I'd go a bit bigger here. We get the worst river possible pretty much. Like the 10 of diamonds is about as bad as it gets. What has happened to your hand here? What has become of your hand strength? This is a very difficult thing to process, and we chatted about this in the coaching session, but our hand has just become utterly devalued in one card. It has gone from being the nuts to being like, I don't know, 50% equity. If that. Maybe still 50% equity, but you know, your opponent has called a check raise and a turnover bet. If I was villain and I was facing this action from this pool, I'm pretty happy just folding pair no redraw on turn. I'm pretty happy folding ace queen on the turn. I've got plenty of pair plus draw, flush draw, set, 2 pair. There's no GTO reason to like feel like ace queen is a pure call on the turn. It's certainly not going to be. So a lot of those hands are already just gone if villain is competent, and villain is going to be skewed more towards stuff that can improve. Stuff like 2 pair, stuff like a flush draw, a pair plus a draw, a pair plus a straight draw, and a lot of that's beating you now. So if there's any block size you can pick on river here, it would need to be tiny. This is too big. This is actually a polarization mistake, I think. I think you just have to check here and check fold, probably. The thing with this spot is that when you block bet here, your opponent will realize at some frequency, or some opponents will realize at a decent frequency, let's say that your range is now capped and that they have loads of bolts and flushes. So if they have got here with queen jack, or they have got there with the bottom of their range and they're a decent player, they've got pocket jacks or something, they may well just find a raise here and put you in a world of pain. They'll put you into the blender. I don't think you can call this raise. I think you're still losing too often because the value range is too vast, and there will be people who just don't bluff, even though it's a good spot to. But by block betting, you're inviting that to happen. You're basically telling your opponent that their king queen or their pocket jacks is no good, and you're telling them to, you know, you're inviting them to go ahead and attack you. If you check this spot instead, people will not realize that queen jack is a bluff now, or that jacks is a bluff now. They will not realize what the bottom of their range is most of the time, and they will check back and you will be able to win with your straight. But some people are bluffing you now because you told them that they couldn't call you, and because they feel backed into a corner like a cornered animal. So this is a weird niche point in this spot, and it's not normally something you'd hear me say. I don't normally rant about how you've induced this and blah, blah, blah. And I still don't think you can call, because I think there's too much value for what it's worth. But check is better here. If villain is a really weak player who's stationary and call turn way too wide, maybe you can do this or block a bit smaller. But against the reg, I don't really like this play. But I'm not going to fault the hero too harshly in this session, because, you know, they're clearly doing some stuff right. It would be very hard to run like this if you were a terrible poker player. It'd be very, very difficult to have a freak run of results like this over 47k hands. And I've seen enough of this player's game to know that they're doing a lot of stuff right, but some of the hands we looked at today were really difficult. And they're the kind of spots that separate the wheat from the chaff, you know, when it comes to poker players. They're the kinds of spots that allow people to really go far in poker by getting these nuanced, difficult, big pot spots right. So I hope today has been useful. The main takeaways are that I am a congested sounding, witch sounding poker coach that invents random terms for terms that already exist. I don't know why when I'm ill I feel like really defensive, so I'm just like recalling things I read that were like critical and like attacking them in my video. Just feel like doing that today. Sometimes I just want to like fight back a bit against random stuff I've read over the months. But yeah, that's the main takeaway. But also, you know, these heater sessions, they are very possible. These heater stretches, sorry, I should say, are very possible. And if you are running bad, if you know things aren't going very well for you at the moment, if you're on a 20 buy-in downswing or you've been break even for 50k hands, don't worry. If you're a good player and if you do the right things and you keep improving, you know, checking out the resources over at carrotcorner.com will help with that immensely. You will have a heater stretch at some point. The next heater stretch is around the corner. It might be 6 months from now. It might be a year from now. Maybe this is only the kind of graph that happens a few times in your career, over 50k samples. But the next 50k sample that looks like this could be around the corner, guys. So don't despair. People do run like God sometimes, just as they run like death sometimes. It's hard to remember that when you're running badly. But yeah, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Hope you enjoyed this video. And yeah, we'll bring you more content very soon, including our subscription service, which is not far away. I will be announcing an official date for that probably on the next YouTube video. So stay tuned for that. See you guys next time. Bye for now.